And what that unsupported feeling does is it adds to the trauma. It becomes a major part of the trauma. So if you have someone that's had childhood abuse, whether it's narcissistic, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and they try to explain it to someone and they discount their feelings, what they hear is, I am unworthy to be heard. And it re-traumatizes us. And when we are in a trauma state, whether a child or an adult, we start building belief systems from that trauma. So that's how we end up with not feeling good enough, feeling unlovable, feeling like there's something wrong with us. Those are belief structures that we've created from a trauma. Now the trauma...
Insight and awareness, spiritual explorer. Soul intuitive, emotional and spiritual mentor and award-winning author, Lorraine Nilon.
Welcome, explorers. Today we're going to talk about validation. Validating other people's emotions, validating our own, validating ourselves. At times we all need someone to validate us. Now, if you need that all the time, we're talking about something else. We all have experiences that we're hoping someone will help us validate our own emotions. Now, unfortunately, some people are incapable of doing that. And it's not because they don't like you. It's not because they don't care. It's because they don't know how to reach that part of themselves that can help someone else. So sometimes we have to acknowledge that the person that we're asking to validate our feelings, our emotions, is incapable to go to the depths that we require. There is a lot of people that can only operate on the surface. They just don't want to go down into the depths. And what they'll use is cliches. And, we've all heard there's plenty of fish in the sea and those kind of statements because they don't know where else to go. And it's important that when we are being honoured, because it is an honour, that someone's honouring us enough that they want to share their inner feelings with us, that we listen. And even if we don't understand, we know and validate that it is important to that person. And if that's how they feel, that's how they feel, without judging them and without trying to fix them automatically. Because what we find is a lot of people try to jump in too quick. Okay, you're having a moment, an experience that's making me feel uncomfortable. So if I fix you and tell you what to do, then I don't have to deal with my feelings right now. So can you see that sometimes that the people that we're asking to validate our emotions have no ability to do that? Now, there's a difference between no ability and deliberately not wanting. And when someone deliberately doesn't want to, and they're using that against you, because that goes on as well. We call that gaslighting, where you're expressing something or you're imparting something that's deep within you, and then someone uses that information against you or uses that moment where you are vulnerable to start playing with your emotions, start discounting them, start degrading you because you're feeling that. Oh, you're too sensitive. Oh, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. Again, all cliches. Those kind of things make someone feel more unsafe. So be careful because it may not be your intention. You just might not know what to say. So you gravitate to those kind of statements. But if they're said with a certain tone and with a feel that doesn't feel like someone's supporting you, acknowledge that. And probably, if you can, find someone that can sit in that space with you. When you become aware that someone is taking your moment of vulnerability, your moment of being in the rawness of your emotions, and they're turning your words and they're twisting them, and they're making you feel like it's all your fault, That's not someone to debrief on. That is someone that is taking advantage of your vulnerability. That person does not have your best interest at heart. And the problem when we are in those kind of moments where we're seeking validation, we're feeling some form of trauma. So it may not appear to be a major event to other people, but it may be the small event. I'm going to use a cliche, the straw that broke the camel's back, that has this flooding of historic emotions. And when you're looking to explore that, you need to have someone that makes you feel very safe, because in the start of that conversation, you may not realize what is going to be said. So validate when you are asked to be with someone in that state. Listen, put phones away, turn TVs off, and actually listen. And even if you don't understand, say, I've never experienced that, I haven't been there, let them know that you are there to support. I'm there to listen. Most of the time, if someone has been abused, the important thing is that they know that they didn't deserve it. They didn't ask for it. They didn't attract it in. When someone is trying to explain what has hurt them, regardless of what it is, and someone goes, but you have attracted that into you, all of a sudden, that person feels like they're the problem. They created this. Now, a lot of the time, you didn't. You can walk into a situation. Someone's got a historic history, and you're now the person that turned up on the line. I think about it as this, is that we always think that people are responding to us and that telling us something about us. The reality is most of the time we're responding from ourselves. And when someone has got a history and it's bubbling over and they can't contain themselves, but they've orientated to blame, or they want to feel superior to someone, so they want to take from someone else. They want to take their sense of self-worth so that they feel superior. You have just walked onto their board. Think of it like a game board. You've just walked onto their game board. The catch is to realize that you're on their board and decide how you're going to respond on that. Now, when you invite someone onto your board and they don't treat it with respect, know that. But know it's not about you. It's about their inability or unwillingness to step on that board with integrity. And then that will help you find the right people that are supportive, even if they don't have the answers, but they're willing to listen. And if that's what you need, then you deserve that. You know, a lot of times what we do is we forget, even ourselves, we forget that we deserve to have our emotional needs met, especially with strong people. A lot of people don't realize that strong people, or people that look like they've got it all together, sometimes they need their emotional needs met. You know, talk to a mother. You know, sometimes it's wonderful to hear thank you instead of just expecting and taking, because it validates what they're doing. They're validating that you appreciate what they've done. And that goes across the board for all types of relationships. So when we're giving a lot and all the time, and if that's part of who we are, that's great. But if we're not being appreciated and we're not being validated for it, then all of a sudden it can feel like exploitation. We can feel like we're being manipulated or used. So if we all start being a bit more respectful and validate each other, but in a respectful way, then all of a sudden we can feel good about ourselves. But if you need it and you chase it, it means that you're not validating yourself. which is one of the most important things you can do, is when you understand yourself better and you're not actually being triggered, but you're actually responding. Now, I don't care how evolved you think you are, there are going to be experiences where you're going to be triggered. And the catch is recognizing that early instead of letting it run. Go, okay, I got triggered because so and so said this and they made me feel inferior, and I was freaking out that they were going to humiliate me. And then I had all these emotions and anxieties about that's what was going to happen. Know that. Know that that's occurring. And then give yourself permission to go, hang on, let's come back. Let's see where this is playing out. Because sometimes a trigger will take us into a confusion fog and we don't recognize that we're having a reaction, and we start looking at what everyone's doing to us and we can feel very victimized. Now, if you've got someone that refuses to take responsibility for themselves, refuses to take responsibility for themselves, and we all know people like that, where it's everybody else's fault. They're to blame because of that. These people are picking on me, all those kind of things. Then know that that person is just looking for someone to blame. And if it's you, you've just walked onto their board and it's become about they're using you to buffer themselves from having to deal with their emotions. It is really hard when it's someone close to you, because instead of validating your worth, it feels like they're draining you of it. And it is, in a way, is when we're with people that we expect or we do it for them and they can't, or they refuse to do it back for us, then it can feel very invalidating. Validation's a big thing. We all like to feel like someone cares and that someone sees us. And if we are in a trauma experience, that we're being heard. So when we are being honoured with that, someone wants to tell us their story, listen. Don't try to fix straight up. Listen to where they're at and give them permission to feel what they feel without judging them, without trying to correct them. Now, there's a catch to that as well. If it's someone that is only doing that to you, every time you see them, they're dumping their emotions on you. It's the same story over and over again. Every conversation leads to that particular conversation. They're not looking for validation. They're looking for an arena to act it out on. And what you'll find that if you question them or you challenge their belief, even if it's done very diplomatically, that it will incite a rage or a disappointment that has them judging you. Now, when they do that, what you know is there's not an equality in the relationship. They're not seeing you as someone that is supportive. They're seeing you as someone like a puppet in their stage show. Then you can actually decide not to be part of. It's not a sacred place. It's not a respect thing that's going on here. You can actually decide not to be on the board. And we've all had those people in our lives where you feel they're just dumping every time that they dump. Now, if they're dumping and they're prepared to look at something for themselves or see that there is a way forward, at least go, I'm looking for a way forward. What is it that I need to deal with? If you can see that that's what they're doing, but it's very different to someone who's refusing to take responsibility for themselves. So we've got to learn to trust our own awareness. We've got to trust that what we're observing is valid, because we can operate through this confusion fog where we are so busy trying to do the right thing or find the right words that we can't see that we're being exploited to be the dumping ground. Validation is one of those things that it depends on the situation, and we have to be honest about what we're experiencing. Now, when we are in a traumatized experience and we do go looking for someone to help us and someone to debrief on and someone to hear us, and we feel unsupported, it re-traumatizes us. And what that unsupported feeling does is it adds to the trauma. It becomes a major part of the trauma. So if you have someone that's had childhood abuse, whether it's narcissistic, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and they try to explain it to someone and they discount their feelings, what they hear is, I am unworthy to be heard. And it re-traumatizes us. And when we are in a trauma state, whether a child or an adult, we start building belief systems from that trauma. So that's how we end up with not feeling good enough, feeling unlovable, feeling like there's something wrong with us. Those are belief structures that we've created from a trauma. Now, the traumas, we think of big things, car accidents, childhood sexual abuse, all those kind of things. But trauma can happen very slowly, like a chipping away. And anyone that's been in a narcissistic relationship will know this. You think those comments aren't hurting you, and then you realize that you've built a whole belief structure around it of not feeling good enough, feeling inferior, thinking you're the person that's doing something wrong, wondering about why you can't get it right. And that's because you're being traumatized, but while being unsupported. So when you ask a narcissist, why did you say that? And they'll be going, well, I never said that. I can't, no, you've misheard me. You've misunderstood. Oh, you're so sensitive. So all of a sudden, you start to self-doubt. And when you start to self-doubt, it becomes another traumatizing event. Belief systems are starting to form. And what you're doing is you're changing, you don't mean to, but you're changing how you feel about yourself. This happens a lot for any type of abuse, especially long-term abuse. It starts changing how you feel about yourself. It can be the silent treatment. Then all of a sudden you believe you're not worthy. They can't be bothered to even talk to you. And what you're feeling is their indifference towards you. And we all, as you know, we all react to indifference. So when someone is willing to do that to you, what they're doing is invalidating that how you feel about yourself is important. And narcissists absolutely try to perfect the art of making you feel like you are less than them. And you can be friends with someone for years, and then you can see them do it with other people. You're always shocked when they do it to you. You can be in a relationship with someone and you realize that all of a sudden, all those things that you thought you couldn't get right was actually someone manipulating you to invalidate yourself. So when you find yourself in that situation, the way forward is to really value your own observations and give yourself permission that it feels like they're trying to put me down. And give yourself permission to go, I'm not sure if they are or they are not. I will observe them. Now, normally what happens is that we get triggered off and away we go into our own history of emotions of feeling not good enough. And then this confusion fog comes up and we're not sure what's happening. So we start second guessing ourselves. We start doubting what we're experiencing. And we try, those with loving hearts will try not to think that that person is really trying to hurt us. Now we do that because we're trying to feel safe. We're trying to feel there's value and worth and that the relationship is significant not only to us, but to the other person as well. And when we discover that it's not, and that they're willing to discard us, what we'll find is all this history of all these belief structures that we built trying to survive our childhood, survive the narcissistic abuse, or try to survive our own self-judgment comes flooding back to us. And then all of a sudden, we feel completely invalidated. Now, that can be the cracking where we start to really get honest and deal with our emotions. We've got to be prepared to pick those emotions up with those belief structures and debate with ourselves whether they are of value or whether they are hurting us. And when we are asked to help someone in those moments where they're doubting their own self-worth, always let them speak. Let them hear themselves, and then remind them of their significance. And you can do that by reminding them how you feel about them. I've never felt that with you. I've always felt you're loving, caring, kind, generous, whatever it is that they're debating. But you can only do that with authenticity. If you pretend this, they'll feel it. And what they'll feel is you're being indifferent to them. So when you're in that sacred space of someone telling you how they feel, make sure whatever you say to them is honest. Even if I really wish you didn't feel that way, or I know this is hard. I can see it on you how hard this is for you. So you can, even if you're unaware of how it would feel, if you're with someone that's grieving a child and you've never experienced that, don't tell them that you know how that feels. Tell them that I have no idea how this feels, but I can see it's hard. I don't know how to help you. That's honest. They feel supported because you're willing to be honest. Now, narcissists and people that want to exploit and abuse you, they are always deceptive in these situations because they are looking for the advantage for themselves. Now, we do get some narcissists that can look like they're being very loving and caring, but it's because they're putting on a performance for others. And it's not about the person that they're that's in the situation. It's not about the person that's in the situation. It's not about the person that's looking to have their feelings validated or to feel supported in the experience they're having. It's about performing for the audience. I can remember at a funeral that I was very upset about. And I got out of the car and I was heading towards the gravesite. And someone come behind me and this person gave me a big bear hug and squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. I was already like a stunned mullet, like I was going to have to go down to the coffin and all those things. And this person squeezed really tight and in my ear said, "You stand there and you let me hug you." That's how they said it. And I realized in that moment, this person wasn't trying to support me. This person wasn't soothing me. This poor person realized that the crowd may look towards me because it was a family member, like that we were burying. And I sort of moved my shoulders and said, "Let me be." But I never forgot how that felt. I felt the indifference that someone would take my grieving and take that moment for me to become their stage to perform on. That is extremely indifferent. And if you take that personally, if you take that experience and go, "Oh, they thought so less of me," then you will feel invalidated. You will feel unworthy, not good enough, all the rest of it. But if you use your awareness and go, "I'm aware that that's where they're at. I choose not to jump on that board, is how I would have said I responded to that. But when you do things like that, which, got some narcissistic traits, if they are, then they are not worthy of you changing your view of yourself for. If everyone shows us how they value us by how they treat us. And you can have people that treat us really well when no one's around, and then all of a sudden they get people around, other people, at a social function, and they're putting you down. Just little chips away, scoffing and laughing at you. And what they're doing, they're actually telling you, I'm frightened that you are going to be perceived as better than me. So I'm taking that from you. And I'm making sure that no matter what happens, that you'll know I can take it from you. Beautiful narcissistic trait. When you see that, trust your awareness. That person is not supportive. They don't have your back. And they are willing to invalidate you. We hear a lot about narcissist traits and all the rest of it, and we see them, it's a spectrum of indifference. And we can all be indifferent and not realize it. We can all be selfish and not realize it. We can all be a little bit out of tune with somebody else's emotions and not realize that they needed something from us in that moment, that we just didn't click. That is very different to someone who is operating from narcissists. Narcissists have intent. They don't explain their own intent to themselves. They don't self-reflect. They just react. And they don't take any responsibilities for their own trigger. If you've been in a relationship with a narcissist, whether it's a parent, a romantic relationship, a friendship, a co-worker, business partner, etc., you'll know that they have a way of making you feel invalidated, and that they will gaslight you until you are so confused about what you feel and what you observe. And that's why it's important for you to really honor your own observations. Now, we can all be wrong, like I said before, but it's like, take notice of what you are aware of. Give it some validity, and then build evidence, and then honor that this is what you are observing. When we are being asked to validate somebody else's feelings, it doesn't mean that we have to agree with them, but we can respect that they feel that way. And when we're in narcissistic relationships, what you'll see is they never respect your feelings. They just do not care. And where that takes us, when you've been in a long-term relationship, any type of relationship, as we've mentioned before, what that does is causes us to struggle to emotionally validate ourselves. So we'll feel something and then we'll question whether we have the right to feel that way. And that can cause us to slip into things like people pleasing, constantly feeling like we're the problem. All those kind of shutting down mechanisms can take us into there. So there's all these different types of reactions that we can have because we're not sure how to validate our own feelings. So be respectful of yourself and give yourself permission to truly acknowledge the feelings that we're feeling. Don't push them down and suppress automatically. Let yourself feel how you feel. When we're looking at it from a soul perspective, feelings are an expression of what we're feeling in that moment. It's how we're reacting internally to what is happening externally or internally. So it's a true feeling. And we have all the feelings. It's not about just having positive feelings. That's not what spirituality or evolution's about. It's about being present in whatever you are experiencing. So when you have that feeling, so if we go back to that funeral story, I had that feeling of absolute sorrow. That is the truth of how I felt in that moment. Then in the next moment when I'm in the bear hug position, is I had that feeling of being attacked, being restricted, and I trusted that's how I felt. So I gave myself permission to feel that. Now, when you've been chipped away, you'll struggle to do that because you'll feel like you have to make this other person feel right and that they've got permission to do whatever. You'll also try to think that they're doing something positive when they're not. So you'll try to excuse their behavior so you're not confronted with your own emotional reaction. Now, we do that. Sometimes we've got to do that because we're not quite attuned to what is happening in that present moment. But when we are, always validate the truth of what you're feeling and give yourself permission to respond in a way that lets you walk away from that experience with your integrity. Because when we get emotionally reactive, what can happen is our emotions can take over. Our logic goes out the window and we're no longer responding, we're reacting. Now, there's not a person on the planet that isn't going to experience that, hasn't experienced it, and will be surprised at what they do in those moments because that's part of our humanness. It's part of our humanness. So, and we have these histories, we have these emotional baggage, and sometimes something triggers us off. And it's not just that present moment, it's this historic stuff that's coming up. And if we are in that, then A, validate it's connected to something that's historic as well as what is happening now. And B, take responsibility for your own emotional reaction. And you, besides everybody else, will be able to process it a lot better. So feelings are coming from the truth of ourselves, and emotions, I know it sounds like a play on words, but emotions are a reaction to the feeling that we don't want to feel. So I'm feeling sorrow, I don't want to feel sorrow, so I go to anger. I'm feeling anger, I don't want to feel that, so I go to frustration. I'm feeling frustration, I don't want to feel that, so I go into rage. I can go into completely shutting down and completely numbing myself out. There's all these different ways that we ricochet around our emotions. And that is why when we're talking to each other about our emotions, that we should validate them and we should try to be as honest as we can about them, because that allows our ability to be self-reflective, to observe ourselves honestly, to work in our favor. It helps us discover what the true feeling was and also what the emotional reaction was. So sometimes when we're sitting with someone that is debriefing about a situation, an event, an emotional experience, you can ask them, how did you feel in that moment? And then what sort of reaction did you have to that feeling? And then you are opening the door for them to have an exploration so that they can explore what they felt and their reaction. And that will help them process it, regardless if it's based in trauma, to do with anything. And if someone calls you on your stuff, this is about our integrity now, and you can see that there's a bit of truth in it, acknowledge that. You know what? There's a bit of truth in that. I don't fully understand myself at this moment. I don't understand why I reacted that way, but I can see why you would take that way. I can see that it came across that way. I don't have to think about it. And be honest. Give yourself time to think about it. When we're trying to validate someone else's feelings, know that they are important to them. And here's my final tip. If you know someone is not going to validate your feelings and they're not going to respect and support you, then don't expect it of them, because that will lead to more disappointment. So I hope this information's interesting and that you got something out of it. And remember, if someone is sitting with you and they're honestly talking about how they feel, what they've experienced, that's a sacred space, and respect it as that. Now it is time to flip the book. I've gone to the Spirituality, Evolution and Awakened Consciousness, and I've opened to page 50. And the heading is Acknowledgement is Opportunity. And where my eyes fell was on a quote: acknowledgement is a stepping stone to exploration. Exploration builds awareness and understanding, and this is the precursor to spiritual evolution. And for me, that's important, because whenever we are looking for validation for our feelings, our perception of reality, it starts with our acknowledgement that what we're thinking, feeling, and experiencing is important and it should matter to us. And the reason why I wrote that it's a precursor to spiritual evolution is that without acknowledgement, we don't have a starting point. And sometimes the easiest way to validate our own feelings is to acknowledge the truth of them. Sometimes we don't know the trigger. Sometimes we've had the emotion for so long, we've carried it around, that we think it's part of who we are, not realizing it's only contributing to the experience we're having. And beneath that is the true essence of ourselves. And for us, we need to acknowledge that that is the most important part of who we are. So that's where I go. And I think one of the other things to remember that is really important is that any personal growth journey, adventure, experience, however you want to word it, it happens in stepping stones. And each time you move forward, you head in a direction. Now you're possibly traveling into unknown territory, and that can be relieving for some and scary for others. But as you know and understand yourself better, you become more at ease with navigating whatever turns up on your path. Thank you. I look forward to talking to you again.